Anne-Marie, thank you very much for agreeing to do this quite special podcast. The podcast is about you, so it's maybe a break from the traditional podcast that we normally do. So, Anne-Marie, obviously we've got a big milestone coming up at the end of June.
Yes.
And for those people that don't know, Anne-Marie, you're, I suppose, hanging up the boots after a career of how many years?
40.
40 years. 40
Yes.
years. So just a short career of 40 years. Maybe we might start from the start.
Yes.
So what took you into the law? Or
Well, I wish I could say that it was from some laudable instinct to act for vulnerable people or do human rights law or something like that. But the truth of the matter is that I think a lot of people in my year in Queen's would have been influenced by the programmes of the day. For example, Crown Court, the paper chase, etc., which is a strange way to start a career. I think as well as that, my mum and dad would have always encouraged us in education, and there were no lawyers in either side of my family. Teaching might have been a more obvious choice, but we had a careers teacher, Mrs. O'Neill, who actively discouraged us from teaching, and I think that had an impact on me. And I've never regretted the career choice in law. I started my apprenticeship with Danny Morgan. It was called an apprenticeship in those days, and that was 85, 86. Finished my apprenticeship with Joe Rice, where I was very fortunate to be offered a job. That job entailed not only family but criminal injuries, criminal damage, because obviously Joe's well known as a specialist in criminal law with a very strong work ethic, and he worked really, really hard himself, and I think that had an impact on all the people around him. And I had quite a large client base, and I was working over two offices, Armagh and Belfast.
And where were you based at that time?
Based in Belfast,
Based in
yes, I was. And then I was sort of headhunted by a solicitor in Malin Megley McBrien, who wanted me to go and specialise in family law with them. So I moved to Newry for 18 months, and then I was very fortunate. An opportunity arose in J.W. Russell Solicitors in Newtonards, where Gordon McElroy was already a partner. And I did a very interesting interview with them and was offered the job. Much to my delight. So I started working there in October 1993, and specialising in family. But in those days it was very much maintenance, spousal maintenance, and contact and residence. Very few divorces or financial relief settlements, so I had to work on that. But I would have had the bulk of the list in Newtonards Court.
When did you solely specialise and focus on family and matrimonial? Was that
in Russell's? Russell's, because there was someone leaving. Mary Connolly was leaving, and she had specialised in family. She was very fortunate in that I knew when I did all the other disciplines, that was the one that really stuck out for me. I'd done conveyancing, I'd done criminal, wills, but family appealed to me.
So it was an appeal.
It was.
Yeah.
It was, over and above everything else, yes.
And the rest is history, as they say.
Rest is history, and here I am, yeah.
So you mentioned there, I'm going to bring, there's a name that you just mentioned there, and that's Gordon McElroy. I'm going to come to Gordon in a wee bit more detail, but you made a big leap in 2003.
2003. Before 2003, I had been made a partner, so I was working obviously alongside Gordon, Colin Haddock, Jack Lenny, a number of other solicitors. And Gordon and I then branched away from the practice in Newtonards, and Gordon at that stage had already set up a very successful commercial corporate practice in Belfast, where we are now in Great Victoria Street. So I joined him. Those were scary days, probably at the start, because it was a question of making sure that the client came with you. A lot of forms of authorities later, but we had managed to negotiate a settlement with J.W. Russell's practice, which allowed me to pretty much maintain the entire family law practice from Newtonards, Ards Peninsula, Bangor, all down that area, and that set me up in Belfast, and then just the practice grew from there. And at that point I was starting to move into more divorces, financial settlements, etc., working alongside Gordon. And we recruited, we were fortunate that some of the staff, and primarily amongst those staff was Maria Conway, who's now a director here at MKB Law. And we were recruiting, we were setting up in the second floor of the building we're in at present, and just trying to maintain the clients we had and build on that.
And how did you find, because obviously you're then going from being able to focus solely on your chosen area of law to then becoming a business owner and a businesswoman, I suppose, as well. How did you find that transition? And I suppose, was there a scary realisation that, the buck now stops with you, so to speak?
Absolutely. And you were conscious of the risks involved in that, and you're conscious of the challenges as well. But to be honest, I saw it more as opportunities. You were self-sufficient. I think both Gordon and I enjoyed that we felt this is our practice. It is to either succeed or not succeed, but it's ours to do with what we want. I was fortunate. Gordon is a very astute business owner. He would have looked towards the IT. He had an image, he had a viewpoint that was good for business, and I trusted him implicitly. I never felt, whilst I knew there were risks, and obviously you know there are risks because you're signing personal guarantees for banks, etc., and you're thinking, how did I end up doing this? But we were fortunate, as I said. He had a successful corporate practice. I brought in the family. We then wanted to recruit. Maria was at that stage doing residential conveyancing, later moving into commercial and corporate herself. And we had a good team, and we felt happy in that team. There was a lot of collaboration. We were looking out for each other, and I think it was maybe a sense of us against the world, because we were coming into an environment in Belfast where there were a lot of much bigger practices than ours.
And obviously, from small acorns, MKB had their 20th anniversary 2 years ago, was it?
That's correct, yes.
So as the firm grew and your management responsibility grew with it, how did you find the competing interests between being a practitioner and a business owner, and any particular challenges that you faced over those?
Difficult, and I'm sure Gordon could speak better to this than I'm speaking to it, in that he may have been left to do a lot of things at times on his own, because in matrimonial, obviously, you're in court practically all the time. I was in court every day. You mightn't get out of court to 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. You're coming back into the office, trying to catch up on your emails, trying to see clients outside normal working hours sometimes, and basically trying to keep the thing ticking over, because you're acutely aware that you wanted to make sure the billing was there, you had targets to meet, and you were also, as a business owner, very conscious of the overheads. So you knew at the end of each month you had the payroll, you had all the overheads to maintain, and you were just working as hard as you could to do that. So juggling the two was not easy, and I know there's times that Gordon would have had to recruit. I wouldn't have been there for it. But again, the trust was implicit that, he would always have worked in the best interest of the practice, so I was comfortable with that.
And in terms of, was there any tough decisions that you had to make? Because obviously us non-contentious lawyers, of which I am one, would quite often look at family law practitioners and say, look, that it's a very vocational area of law to go into. I mean, you've already said that area appealed to you, and that's ultimately why you ended up in that. There's bound to have been a number of occasions, though, where you had a conflict between the business needs of the business.
Oh, yes.
And the actual part of, I suppose, delivering a service for your client. I'm thinking in particular in terms of maybe the transition away from maybe legal aid over recent years, or
that's right. And I mean, the legal aid was very good to us in times when we needed it. For example, during the property crash, when there wasn't quite the same amount of transactional work and conveyancing, and every practice took a hit on that. But the family was literally keeping the place ticking over, and we knew we had our cheque from legal aid every month. So that was a big leap of faith, and I have to say Gordon completely supported me in anything I wanted to do in that regard. And we knew we might have, there might be a few months where it would take a while for the private work to come in and the billing to come in and that, but it stuck with me. And I know that obviously a lot of practices where their family law are linked with the criminal side of the practice, or a sole practitioner who also does family law. I suppose we were rare in that we were one of the few practices where we had corporates sitting alongside family, but I never once felt that family was treated as a second-class citizen or something that was just an adjunct onto the business. I was very much holding my own in terms of making sure the money was coming in, and profitability I knew lay. If I was going to do the private law work without legal aid, it had to be done exceptionally well, had to be done very efficiently. I had to provide the best service I possibly could, because I was competing with other people who were in the same area as me. And, clients are quite rightly fickle in that if they're not happy with someone, they will move. At the end of the day, I don't disregard the fact we're providing a service, and the public out there can go to wherever they want to go to. So the challenge was juggling the needs of the practice against making sure I give the best possible service I could to my clients, and building up a reputation, because unlike other areas of law where you could network and you could get, to try and attract business, family is very much, well, I can't go out and say, would you like to be divorced? And if you would you like to come to me? So word of mouth was the only way, and we were very fortunate that we have a very strong marketing executive in Kim Horner, and Kim would have, looked at my LinkedIn, would have kept me to speed with that, and generally where she could enhanced the family law package by marketing it, and that would be where I recruited family law practitioners. I had a number of assistant solicitors down through the years. We'd have given a bit of publicity to that, but ultimately it's your reputation and it rests on that, and that's scary.
And I'm glad that you mentioned about the reputation. I think, Anne-Marie, it's a credit to you that you do have a very good reputation. And that being said, I'm sure there's a lot of practitioners in Belfast might be glad that you're not going to be up against them in the future. Any funny stories about that reputation? Because I have heard a couple of rumours of a few names that...
Oh, yes. Yes, I do recall that in Newton Ards I was being referred to as the Rottweiler. That was one of them. Yeah. I was told that, and then I have to say there were people who came to me based on that reputation, because perhaps they knew that their divorce or financial settlement was going to be particularly acrimonious, and only they would know that, and they felt that if they came to me then they knew I would fight for them. But ultimately family law should be more... It should be less adversarial. Yep. I have, I'm a big believer in alternative dispute resolution as well. But there are, unfortunately, cases which only lend themselves to issuing proceedings. Yeah.
And I mean, that's interesting. Obviously, in recent times, there has been more of a push towards mediation and alternative dispute resolution. Aside from that, what other big changes have you seen over the course of the last, say, 30 years in particularly in family law and the profession?
I think the biggest changes have obviously been the legislative changes, because we were all working under the matrimonial causes order. We still are, and I mean, I do think it's a bit outdated. I've sat on a committee chaired by Lord Justice Gillen, and we were trying to look at changes that could be brought about that would improve the family law, and particularly accessibility of family law, looking at alternative dispute resolution. But we're still working on the 1978 legislation. The changes that I've seen, which would have been the major changes, would have been in residence contact of children under the Children Northern Ireland Order in 1995, and that would have brought about a lot of changes, because before that you were working in a court where spousal maintenance was being treated alongside custody and access issues, and then there was one court for maintenance and one court for residence contact, and the proliferation of those and the lengthening of the lists shows that there was obviously a need for that, and that's where a court adjudicates on where children should live, who they should live with, what length of time they should spend with that parent in the context of divorce. But I sort of moved and evolved from, I was pretty much doing most of that in Newton Ards. Then by the time I got up to Belfast, I was then moving more into the divorce and financial settlements. The other change was obviously the Family Homes Domestic Violence Northern Ireland Order 1998, where we now have no molestation occupation exclusion orders. And that meant that the area of domestic violence and domestic abuse of women was really opened up, because you were looking at other criteria for a woman to bring an application for protection, and that would have been outside of threats of violence or actual physical violence. The coercive control became one of the criteria, and that was a very good thing, because you had a lot of women and men out there who were living in very, very difficult situation, but the person wasn't violent, didn't see themselves as being victims of domestic abuse, and I think that has opened up the law to a lot more people. It's just unfortunate that the element of the regulation where a neighbour or a doctor or a health visitor or a social worker could bring the application instead of the actual victim, that has never been brought in, and that's a bit of a shame. But again, you were working and trying to come to terms with the different pieces of legislation and make sure you're on top of it.
And you think that the profession has adopted well in family law over the course of that period? And
I do. I think it's been very challenging for practitioners, but I've always been impressed by my peers and colleagues in the sense of dedication and commitment, which, is rare in other disciplines of law. And I remember years ago a colleague used to call it the touchy-feely end of the profession, and maybe it is, but I do think it brings with it not just a working knowledge of the law, the case law, the authorities, individual judges, how they will treat applications, but also an investment in your client and an investment in the outcome for your client, and a recognition how difficult it is for clients to come in and tell you things that they would not tell anyone else, even in their immediate family. That's a privilege, but it's a responsibility, it's a duty, and I take that very seriously.
Any regrets, Anne-Marie? Any regrets over the 40-year career?
I suppose one regret I have is, and it may well be called a lack of self-confidence, in that I would have tended to take on a volume of cases thinking, as maybe solicitors do, there might be a famine next week and I'm not going to get another case for another month. You probably understand that yourself, Neil. But at times I probably took on a larger volume than maybe I should have. But what that did was it just would have impacted on me personally, and probably, working a lot longer than maybe I should have been. But that was a sense of, a lack of self-confidence, wondering where your next case was going to come from. Apart from that, in terms of regrets, no, I'm pleased with the choice of career. I'm pleased with the choice of the discipline of law that I've done. I've met some very inspirational people down through the years. Lorraine Thompson, who I really looked up to when I worked in Newton Ards. Paddy Kelly, director of the Children's Law Centre, who I was privileged to work alongside as the chair of the management committee. A lot of solicitors, barristers, KCs, who I would have learned a lot from down through the years, including the Lady Chief Justice Siobhan Keegan. I worked with her in public law cases, private law cases. So there's a lot of good people out there who I would have enjoyed and would have almost give me a sense of, this is the right career path for me. I've enjoyed this. There have been, of course, mornings when you felt almost physically sick going into court and thinking, I hope I get the right outcome here, but you could never sometimes predict it. No, I don't have many regrets.
Well, the flip side of that then is what would you see as your biggest achievement in your career to date? And it can't be hearing that your nickname is a Rottweiler.
No, it was not, certainly not. I think, to be honest, I've been fortunate working alongside Gordon, who I call a friend, and we knew each other through Queen's. Fortunate to work alongside Maria Conway and David McAlinden and all the practitioners in the practice and everybody. And I suppose my achievements in terms of personal career development, the advanced advocacy course at Queen's was very interesting and enjoyed doing it. Another highlight was I did the mediation course at Queen's, so I'm an accredited mediator and I'm really interested in alternative dispute resolution. But also the individual cases I did where I can look back and think, I did my best for that client. We had a decent income. I can call some of those clients friends and I meet up with them and have coffee with them. And I consider those, the personal connections I've made down through the years, to be my biggest achievement.
Yeah. And life after law. This is probably the most difficult question.
Yes, it is.
You've obviously had a bit of time to think about it.
And I had a number of lovely messages from my family this morning, quite emotional messages, what they see as my last Monday. But of course, it may not be my last Monday in the sense that I'm fortunate enough to be taking up a consultancy role with the MKB Law, which will be a 2-day week, but it keeps me connected not only to family but also the practice in general. And I do have plans. My husband retired 2.5 years ago, so I think he's a bit concerned that I will interfere with the routine he has built up. So, but I want to spend more time with family and friends. I'd like to do a bit of travel. I did Irish A-level and I'd like to take up Irish again and just generally have time to myself.
It goes without saying that you'll miss the cut and thrust of...
I'll miss the people, and people I miss is obviously directors, but also Beth Kennedy, my PA, who is my right hand woman. I absolutely couldn't do what I do without Beth, and I mean that. I at times down through the years where being able to count on Beth has been huge for me. And you come in the morning and you think what your day looks like, and Beth's there with a cup of coffee and a word of, don't worry about that, I'll do that. You do that, you focus on that, I'll focus on that. We're a really good team, and I really miss that collaboration. And before that, I had a lovely secretary called Anita Story, who's from Bangor, and Anita again was really, really helpful to me. So, I'll miss that, but I'll still be able to keep up those connections, and I'd like the professional connections kept up as well, because, as I said earlier, I've made friendships with peers and colleagues that you may not have in other areas of law, but because we've all cried on each other's shoulders, so as to speak, with our various cases, it's a unique connection. Yeah. It's a unique connection.
Well, Anne-Marie, I know you're going to stay on in a consultancy capacity, so I'll still be seeing you 2 days a week, and I look forward to that. But one of the things that I should have said is, and we don't normally publicise this, but before I joined MKB, I wasn't sure what MKB stood for. I am going to disclose, a world exclusive here, what the K stands for, and that is Kelly.
That's right.
So you're always going to be the K in the MKB. Anne-Marie, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.